men or women who make better investors, and who performs better under stress? I guess it depends who you ask, or maybe which gender you ask. But actually, there's lots of research, and that's what we're going to discuss in this month's Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast, as I have a chat with Tom Corley about the results of his research. So welcome to the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator, who has once again been voted our leading expert in wealth creation. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Who make better property investors, men or women? Well, that's what I'm going to discuss in my chat with Tom Corley in my monthly Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast, today's show in between the regular shows. Look, up to now, the answer really depended upon who you asked, or to be honest, their gender who you asked. But neuroscientists have now uncovered evidence suggesting that when the pressure is on, women bring unique strengths to decision-making and make less risky decisions under high-stress situations. Now, I was doing some research on this and quoting separate neuroscience studies conducted by the University of Southern California. The New York Times explained it as follows. They said, under low-stress situations, men and women make decisions about equally, but men took more risks when they were stressed. They became more focused on big wins, even when they were costly and less likely. Look, in other words, it says when everything's going smoothly, men and women, even as far as decision-making goes. However, when things get dicey, men tend to play the long shots, while women tend to think things through better. And in my mind, that's a huge competitive advantage in investing, in the business world, and, well, pretty much everywhere else too. Now, as I did some more research on this, Inc. reported scientists to say as follows. The reason women make better decisions under stress isn't that women are nicer or more collaborative or any of that crunchy granola stuff. It's because women's brains handle the stress hormone cortisol better than men's brains handle it. So according to the scientists, men under stress experience a huge spike in cortisol, which degrades their decision-making ability. Every pundit and analyst in business world has repeatedly pointed out that today's business world is going to continuously get more stressful. Women experience smaller spikes, and that creates urgency but doesn't impede their decision making. The more stressful things get, the better, look, on average anyway, the better women are, and the better they're going to become at making decisions than men. Again, on average. So guys, the conclusion I've come to doing some research is that when the going gets tough, she gets smarter and you and I get dumber. And since disruptive innovation means that we're going to have tougher times ahead, if you're not hiring women and promoting women, you're only going to prove how dumb you are. Now, look, I know at Metropole I've promoted a number of women to director levels, director positions in the company. Now, maybe this is a good reason to have more women in your property investment team and in businesses. And I guess it's got to be in government too. We know there's a shortage of those. We can't make the big jobs in government or business any less stressful, but we can ensure that when the pressure rises, that there's going to be a balance between taking the big risks and making real progress. But anyway, look, getting back to what I started to ask at the beginning, back to property, who makes better investors? Well, when it comes to property, similarly, men have a higher tendency to gamble and they're more easily manipulated, while women are usually more cautious, seeking lower risk, longer-term sustainable capital growth. Now, Riskwise did some research on this and came to the conclusion after speaking to a lot of agents that selling to a man can sometimes be as easy as having a pretty face in front of him. In fact, the research undertaken by Riskwise showed that men were more tempted to get-rich-quick schemes, marketing ploys, while women, they looked more for long-term performance. Riskwise found property marketers often used visual sensors to entice men. For example, it's common practice for female models to be hired to stand behind the professional salespeople at those property expos. Apparently, a study of real estate agents who hired these models over the past several years revealed that typically models increase traffic to their booths by 50 to 100%, with a similar increase in the rate of high-quality sales leads, many of which converted to transactions. Gee, it shows how dumb we are as men. Anyway, apparently it was also noted by these agents that a short absence of that pretty model resulted in the immediate and significant decrease in traffic in their booths. Apparently, women are more likely to recognise that these aren't free seminars and the clients get a lot of benefit from it. They recognise that the salesperson is working for a property developer or a promoter. Men, on the other hand, are more likely to be swept up by the hype and believe that they are the client and that the organiser of this free seminar is truly acting in their own best interest. Now, gee, that's interesting, isn't it? So, back to the question. Are women better property investors than men? Again, following on from Riskwise research, it showed that women are more aware of the risks and seek tools to manage them, and men tend to ignore the risk. Women's interest in risk and mitigation strategies were apparently 38% higher than men. In fact, studies have shown that men are overconfident and have a higher tendency to gamble. And of course, this is a concern in the property market where high-risk ventures can have devastating consequences. On the other hand, women search for low-risk, longer-term sustainable capital growth, and men are more likely to chase those hotspots or the get-rich-quick schemes. Generally being more risk-averse, women validate any property information they receive with an external and an independent source. They're prepared to take advice. Men, on the other hand, are more inclined to search for validation of their own preconceived ideas. I've spoken about that sort of cognitive bias before, confirmation bias, looking for somebody to confirm what you've already decided anyway. So even when presented with formal research, complete with data and analysis, which clearly reveals the risks, men still have a tendency to brush aside the facts. Now, as a successful investor, you've got to follow a strategic process and back up your actions with independent research. And I guess the research is showing that women have a natural tendency to operate in this fashion, which protects them from high risks and increases their chances of investing with long-term success. On the other hand, the risk of failure increases when decision-making processes are driven by flashy advertising or big numbers. And I guess by nature, men are more likely to follow their gut feeling rather than the facts of the research. And as a result, men are in greater danger of being lured in by the industry hype, by sure bets, much more so than women are. Well, that's the research I've come up with as I've dug into the statistics. And now let's have a chat with Tom Corley, who's done similar research in the United States as part of his Rich Habits studies. So welcome, Tom.
Hey, Michael, it's good to talk to you again.
Now, Tom, you've spent a lot of time studying habits because I know you've recognised that 40% of the time what we do is on autopilot. A lot of the time what we do is just at an unconscious, as a subconscious level, and the habits that we've got were sent to us, given to us, we learned as a child, now we're carrying them on as an adult. But have you in your studies realised a difference? Is there a difference between the way men and women behave and their habits?
There is, Michael. You know, you and I, we've been trying to focus on the difference between the habits of the rich and the poor in our book, Rich Habits, Poor Habits. Well, there's actually, you know, if you peel this onion, there's actually more to it. There's actually differences between the habits of males and females. Some of it is genetic. It's their DNA. It's just the difference between men and women. Some of it is, you know, cultural, you know, how culture and society, how we raise boys and girls. And but yeah, I found a number of differences. One of them, for example, let's just talk about gambling. Well, there's a lot of research out there. This isn't my research. This is from many studies that have been done about gambling and the differences between gambling from men and women. But statistically, women gamble much less than men, and also fewer women gamble. So the women who do gamble less, and there are fewer women who gamble. So there's just the numbers of people gambling who are women is less, and the frequency is lower. So that would be one.
Well, clearly, one of the things we've recognised, Tom, is that gambling is a poor habit. It's one of the habits that hold people back because they don't recognise that it's a tax for people who can't do maths. So people gamble because they see it as the lottery or whatever is the only way of developing financial independence. Doesn't work that way, does it, Tom?
No, if your retirement plan is a lottery ticket, you're kind of screwed. And we know we've experienced that in our lives. You talk about it. I talk about it with my dad in OTB. So gambling is a poor habit, and I guess it's a good thing that women gamble less and less frequently because they have fewer poor habits with respect to gambling then.
Okay, what about risk? Do men take more risks than female? Is that really true?
It is. There's plenty of research out there. And this is another one that seems to be hardwired into men via their DNA, and they're just more aggressive than women. They have a higher risk tolerance, and I guess a higher risk threshold, so they're willing to take more risk. And this is not necessarily a bad thing if the risk is calculated risk, Michael. It could be a good thing. But if it's that kind of risk that like gambling risk, it is a bad thing.
Okay, as we work through the potential differences between men and women and their habits, I know that one of the rich habits that you keep talking about is educating yourself and reading. Is there a difference between the way males and females do it, Tom?
Yeah, again, I found this in my digging into all the research on habits. Women. The good news is women read more than men. Statistically, they read more books. They spend more time reading. The bad news is women read for more for entertainment than for learning, and conversely, men read more for learning and self-improvement. So I guess in that respect, reading is a rich habit, but reading for entertainment is a poor habit. So women have, they're on the losing side of that when it comes to that particular habit.
Now, there's lots been written about different communication styles and how women communicate very differently to men. Does that translate into rich habits and poor habits, Tom?
Yes, and this is probably not going to be shocking for a lot of men, but the average woman speaks 7,000 words a day compared to 2,000 for men. So you and I know good communication is a rich habit. So here women have the upper edge when it comes to men on communication. They're just better communicators. And because they're better communicators, they're better at managing relationships. This also, filters into negotiations when it comes to business. They're just better communicators, which means because of the good communication, there's fewer mistakes that are made. And so this is a real big bonus habit for women.
If you think about it, communication comes in different ways. So I guess women are also good at reading personalities. They seem to be a bit better than men at that, aren't they?
Yeah, and so I found that there's something called the insular, which is part of the brain, and it's really like one of the traffic cops of taking in sensory information. And the insular in women is just slightly larger than men. So that may be part of the reason why they are much better communicators. Their brains are hardwired to be better communication machines,
So they're good communicators, they're good at reading people, they're good at giving feedback. Another way that successful people become successful is they come up with good ideas, they're creative. Is there a difference between the creativity of men and female based on your studies?
There is, and this, quite frankly, surprised me when I was done researching this particular item, creativity. It turns out that men are more creative than women, and this is a physiological or neurological structural thing. Men have a smaller corpus callosum. That's the thing, that's the nerve fibers that separate the right hemisphere from the left hemisphere. And why does that matter? Well, the smaller the corpus callosum, the more the right brain and the left brain can communicate. Or to put it a different way, if you think of the corpus callosum as a barrier, the smaller that corpus callosum, the smaller the barrier, so that the right and the left side of the brain can communicate more. There's less interference in the communication. And why is this important? Because, part of the right brain and the left brain, they have different functions, but when they're able to work together, especially around creativity, you're getting the whole brain working together. Well, in women, they have, their bigger corpus callosum means their right and the left brain aren't working as well together as it doesn't with men.
Now, Tom, I think some of the things you said today, some of the things we're saying are going to offend some people. And obviously they're very creative women and some men who are not as creative. But it's interesting what science shows. So we're not talking about theory or your feeling or my feeling. We're really talking about scientific facts here, aren't we?
Yeah, that's all I really care about. And you too. We just care about the facts. We're not really, if it insults people, it's then the facts are insulting them. It's just research and studies that are, of course, these things could change as they do better and more comprehensive studies. But right now, based on the studies and the research, these are the facts.
Okay, well, let's get on to another fact then. Let's talk about organizational skills, because to be successful in business, in life as an entrepreneur, I think you've got to be a good organizer. Is there a difference in the skills of men and women in that regard?
Yeah, this is one where women win big time. They're just better organizers than men. They pay attention to detail. And that's really important when you're running a business, Michael. If you don't pay attention to the details, your business can slip away from you, and you can find yourself losing money. So women, in that respect, I think they probably make better CEOs or COOs, chief operation officers, because their attention to detail is such that nothing escapes their purview, and they're looking at everything. Whereas men, they're probably better at delegating, because they just, physiologically, the way that they're structured, their DNA, they just don't, the attention to detail just isn't as great as women.
This is fascinating. Women seem to be coming out on top much more than men do. So the last question I want to ask you, Tom, is money. We're talking about money today, really, in many ways, aren't we? So what about savings? Is there a difference in the habits of men and women with regard to savings?
Yeah, sorry, men, but you lose again. Women are better savers when it comes to money. This, in large part, has to do with their cautious or risk-averse nature. So they're worried about the future. They don't like to gamble their money, so they prefer to save. And then when they invest cautiously. So they're just better at saving. And you can't invest what you don't save. So that means that women, this rich habit that women have actually is an important rich habit. It's one of the ways, one of the three paths to wealth: saving and investing, becoming a virtuoso, or pursuing a dream. So women win big time on this one.
So as we look at the difference in the rich habits and poor habits of men and women, I haven't done the sums. I'm a bit scared to do the final tally, Tom, but I think women come out on top. But my conclusion would be that you actually need both, and having the yin and the yang, having the two working together works very well. And we often see that in couples. I'm sure you see it as an accountant. I see it as a property strategist. When we sit with couples, they come to the party with different talents, different skills, but if they combine them, work well together, boy, have they got unlimited opportunities.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when you're married, you see this because I know you have an amazing spouse as a partner. So what you have is really, you call it your yin and yang, but it's 1 and 1 equals 11. It's not 1 and 1 equals 2. When you have the right partner, it has a multiplier effect, and they just help you become better at what you do. Each partner adds value to the other person, but in multiples. And so I think it's one of the things that isn't talked enough about, and that is finding the right significant other in life is probably one of the greatest traits or characteristics of wealthy individuals.
And then sticking to the marriage and not losing half in your asset reallocation program is the other one, Tom.
Yeah, well, what I always say to people, because I do some divorce planning in my CPA life, I always tell them that when they're talking about divorce, it's basically financial Armageddon. If they're going to lose a lot of money, both spouses are going to be poor. So the idea is to, I found in my research, because I have data on this, there's something like 88% of the self-made millionaires in my study were married once, and that's it, and they're still married.
Well, you've managed to do that, so well done, Tom. So, again, if you want to find out a bit more about rich habits, poor habits, how you can become more successful in life, why not go to Amazon.com, any good online bookstore, and some of the big retail bookstores as well, and get your own copy of Rich Habits, Poor Habits. It's an international bestseller now that Tom and I have written a couple of years ago. It's done so well, our publishers just reprinted it again, and we'd love you to learn how to get to the next level in your life by understanding how your life is controlled by these habits. Tom, thanks a lot, and we'll be back for our monthly Rich Habits podcast again real soon.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
At the top of the show, I asked who make better investors, men or women, and now you've got a better idea. This was the monthly Rich Habits, Poor Habits podcast that I have with Tom Corley in between my regular weekly Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you learned something from it, and if you did enjoy it, please do me a favour and pass the message on to others. Tom Corley and my mission is to help you and as many other investors cut through the clutter, change their habits, improve their life, and become more successful in business, in property, in all areas of their life. And we'd love you to help other people do it too by telling them a bit about the show. So pass on the message through Twitter, through Facebook, LinkedIn, just let somebody know about it. And I look forward to catching up with you next week for my regular Michael Yardney podcast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect and pass on their wealth through strategic property advice. If you got value from today's show, we'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review, and we'll read it out on a future show, and Michael will gift you one of his books as a way of saying thank you. Just go to michaelyardneypodcast.com/review and let us know what you think. If you don't already subscribe, head over to iTunes or your favourite Android app. You'll find us there as Michael Yardney Podcast. If you'd like to gain instant access to the show notes, head across to michaelyardneypodcast.com. Watch out for our show next week. You'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes.